Well, here's the difficulty too in determining what the meaning of these visits are, is that the fact that they're so ambiguous. Does a state official going to Yasukuni Shrine and praying constitute state support? And this leads, whenever there's a visit, to lots of questions. How did the person sign the registry book? Did they sign it with just their name, or did they also give their government position? How did they act ritually? For example, did they bow once towards the shrine, or did they bow twice and clap their hands? And the difference is, just bowing shows respect, but when you also bow and clap your hands, that means you're summoning the spirits. That's the purpose of why you do it. Well, if you're summoning the spirits and then bowing, you're making very clear that that's an act of religious worship. Moreover, it's customary to leave flowers or some kind of donation. Well, who pays for that? If you pay for it out of your own pocket, it's easier to say that's unofficial, even if you're prime minister. But if you charge it to the government, well, that certainly seems to be an act of worship and an act of public support. And this has been gotten around by though the government officials will say, well, this is just social protocol. This is an act of worship. We're giving these flowers, making this donation as an act of social protocol. And what also makes things interesting is that, for example, the prime minister of a few years ago, Koizumi, would sign his name, Koizumi, who is prime minister, visited. Well, what does that mean? Is that an official visit or an unofficial visit? And he, in fact, would claim that, he said, well, just because I'm prime minister doesn't mean I lose my religious freedom. I have freedom to go worship where I want, even if I am a government official. You don't lose your religious freedom by being a government official. So this makes things very, very complicated. Further complicating matters was that Koizumi, when he, in order to build up support, promised that he would make an unofficial visit, which causes some problems. How can you, in order to build political support for you and your party, claim that you're going to make an unofficial visit? That seems to me like an official visit. And he and other prime ministers have continued to make so-called unofficial visits, despite the Supreme Court of Japan saying, well, these are official visits and you shouldn't do this. So this creates kind of a constitutional crisis, and this issue has not been resolved even to this day. So what then does this all mean? Well, we see here at least an attempt to give the appearance of state support. Whether a visit is officially unofficial or officially official, you still have government officials going and worshipping or bowing and making offerings that are covered, and their visits are covered in the media. So it certainly, even if it's not official, certainly gives the appearance of being official. And what we see here then is a desire to get away from the Constitution by many politicians and by a large section of society by establishing support for religion. Now, attempts in this respect have largely failed. We also see, though, a parallel trend, a movement towards greater restrictions on the free exercise of religion. Why is this? This question can be answered in two words: Aum Shinrikyo. Aum Shinrikyo is a new religion, and it began with its founder's vision that through gaining enough followers and training them properly in the truths of his religion, that they would be able to save the world from the apocalypse, the coming apocalypse. However, he didn't gain the number of followers he thought he should, and he didn't think his religion enjoyed the respect from society that it ought to have. And so what happened was the religion transformed from one of saving the world from apocalypse to embracing apocalypse as a way of punishing a society and a world that had rejected the followers of the religion and the truths that they had come to teach. And this culminated in 1995 in the sarin gas attacks on the Tokyo subway system. And basically what happened was several of the followers of this new religion got on different subway trains, and they each carried with them a bag of sarin gas, plastic bag, and a umbrella with a sharpened tip. They put the plastic bag down, stabbed it with the umbrella, and then got off at the next stop. And then the sarin gas was released. And this killed about a dozen people and injured several hundreds. and so it was a very, very massive, basically attack. And you can see the aftermath here of these injured people being taken off to the hospital. Now, what's important to note, though, is this was not the first sarin gas attack launched by this group. They used another sarin gas attack by spraying it out of a minivan, or out of a van outside of a courthouse where their members were being tried in order to delay the court case, and this in fact worked. And they also conducted other murders. For example, a lawyer had been hired to investigate the group by some people who had been previously connected to it, or who were looking for their relatives who were part of it. And this lawyer was causing too many troubles for the religion, so some of the members were sent to go and kill him. So they went to his house, and he was at home, and they killed him. His wife was also at home, and they killed her. And his young child, I believe less than 2 years old, was also at home, and so they killed the child as well. And any time that this religion was being investigated for these and other crimes, they would use the concept of religious freedom to protect themselves. So the government would start investigating them, and then they would say, "Hey, you're violating our religious freedom. You are oppressing us. You shouldn't be doing this," and then the government would back off. And they, in fact, used the tax-exempt status they gained from their religion to stockpile legal weapons and manufacture the sarin gas that they used in the subway. So in the wake of this incident, the state began to exert more control over religion. However, despite a weakened commitment to the free exercise of religion, there still is in Japan a very strong commitment to religious freedom. Having discussed Japan, we will now look at the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, commonly known as North Korea. As you know, Korea is a divided nation between the North and the South, the North being a communist government, the South being a democratic government. And you can see kind of the difference these two countries have gone economically speaking in this picture here. This is a satellite photo taken at night. As you can see, South Korea is awash in light. Those are the lights of various cities, and the large one in the upper left corner of South Korea is Seoul, that large blotch of light. Whereas if you look at North Korea, it's about the only city that you can see that has lights on at night is Pyongyang, which is the capital. Now in North Korea, we can't really say that there's any religious freedom. In fact, it's difficult to say that there's even such a thing as religious tolerance. And many people outside of the country, and perhaps inside as well, are very critical of this. And one Korean American by the name of Albert Park, a Protestant Christian, wanted to protest this. And the means he chose to do so was in December of 2009, he decided, or he actually crossed into North Korea and planned to ask the North Korean government to give religious freedom. And this was going to be his protest. He was going to go there and request that they do this, knowing that he would be imprisoned. And he indeed was captured and imprisoned. And he was later released. But what's very interesting is that he signed, while he was in prison, a statement affirming that North Korea in fact had and has religious freedom. Now, more than likely, this statement was coerced. He likely signed it under duress. But what's important here is that when we look at North Korea's position in the world, North Korea has absolutely no problem protesting international norms, especially in regards to nuclear weapons and other military weapons. It has absolutely no problem defying the world. And yet, religious freedom is such an important concept that North Korea still feels the need to pay lip service to it, instead of repudiating it and just saying, well, we don't need religious freedom, who cares, that's a Western bourgeoisie idea, it's just not necessary here. Instead, it felt the need through Albert Park to affirm this, and in fact in its constitution it guarantees religious freedom despite the fact that it doesn't really exist. There's very little we can say about North Korea because it's such an isolated country. other than the fact that there is no religious freedom essentially and very little even religious tolerance. We can say more though about South Korea, formerly known as the Republic of Korea. Now, before 1910, both North and South Korea were part of one country. In 1910, that country, Korea, was annexed by Japan, and in 1945 it was liberated in the wake of World War II and the dismemberment of the Japanese Empire, but then divided between the Soviet Union in the north and the United States and the UN in the south. And this split has essentially continued to this day. In the north, you then had this communist form of government. In the south, you had at first what was supposed to be a democracy, but was really a dictatorship that eventually became a true democracy. And so South Korea has a true liberal democracy today. Now, what's important to note is that Korea was actually colonized by a non-Christian nation, right? Most of the empires, the United States, France, Great Britain, and so forth, identified at this time during this time as Christian nations, and would even use Christianity as part of their way of establishing control of the countries they wanted to colonize and so forth. However, because in Korea it was colonized by a non-Christian country, it was very easy for Christianity to become a protest religion, a religion of resistance. And this was particularly true of Protestant Christianity. Most of the Protestant missionaries who worked in Korea were from the United States, from Canada, from Great Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. And so they had this kind of notion of Protestant Christianity being very intimately connected to Western civilization. And they connected as well this idea of civilization with freedom. Of course, one of the big ones would be religious freedom, but also freedom of the press, freedom of speech, free elections, and freedom to engage in economic activities, basically meaning support for capitalism. And so what happened when the United States and then to a lesser degree the UN during the Korean War, but mostly the United States, became dominant in South Korea, they tended to support Protestant nationalists like this man here, Syngman Rhee, because they were so similar to the United States in how they ostensibly viewed the world and their commitment to freedom and democracy and to anti-communism. So these were the United States' natural allies in South Korea, and so they supported them and helped them gain control of the government in South Korea, which is why, even though it was supposed to officially be democracy, it was more of a dictatorship for many years. But what's key is then, because of this connection between Protestant Christianity, Western civilization, freedom, U.S. support, and so forth, when the Republic of Korea was founded, its constitution included a clause giving very, very liberal and very, very strong protection for freedom of religion.